Hello, everyone. It is July 22nd. I almost forgot what day it was for a second about that. I'm sorry. But anyway, last night, I did the review of the new Terminator movie, and I thought today I would go ahead and get to a discussion about something that I promised last week, I think. Um, I'm dating a girl who's wonderful and amazing. I adore everything about her thus far, and I'm sure I will adore everything about her forever. At least I hope to. But she is one of those poor, deprived individuals who does not know very much about comic books. She does not know the difference between Marvel and DC. Now, that's not a bad thing. It means uh, it's actually a pretty good thing. The reason it's a good thing is because she can become a fan and she can like both of them. She doesn't have to be polarized, and that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. Um, but for most of us, the most of us who have been fans for a long time, we tend to be a little more polarized towards liking either Marvel or DC. Um, I personally am more of a DC Comics fan. I don't mean any disrespect to Marvel Comics. I love Marvel Comics. I like a lot of their storylines and a lot of the characters. But I just personally enjoy DC Comics more. But that's me. Um, and this discussion of the differences is not going to get overly in depth. I'm not going to tell you about every editor, every animator, every artist they had, whatever. I'm not going to get in discussions the back history of individuals like Stan Lee or Bob Kane or Bill Finger, anyone like that. I'm not going to get into that. Um, I mainly want to discuss the primary differences in these two brands. And I'm going to do it as unbiased as I possibly can. So, excuse me. First off, I want to state that DC Comics is actually the older of these two. Now, there are other comic publishers in the United States, Dark Horse being the first one that comes to mind. There are quite a few others, but DC and Marvel are are pretty much the go-tos. Um, it's actually a lot like in politics in the United States. You have the Republicans and you have the Democrats. Well, you have DC and you have Marvel, and for all of the differences that people want to point out, which there's actually quite a few, they're pretty similar, believe it or not. But anyway, DC, as I said, is the older of the two. DC Comics was founded in 1934. Marvel Comics was founded in 1939. Most of DC's characters, like their biggest characters, were released between 1938 and 39, somewhere around there. Uh, Actually, I'll round up and I'll say 1944, just to be fair here. Most of their major characters that everyone's familiar with came out in a roughly 20-year span between say 1940 and 1960. In that time frame, we got the Flash, we got Green Lantern, Batman, obviously Superman. The Justice League was founded. Martian Manhunter came out. We got um, Green Arrow. Um, basically, okay, Aquaman for sure. The primary characters most people think of when they think of something in the DC Comics universe. Supergirl, Batgirl, all these characters that you could think of came about between roughly 1940 and 1960. It was a pretty popular thing. But around 1955 or so, superhero comics had started to become a little bit unpopular. Um, but in the 60s or so, DC Comics decided, to try and basically reboot their superhero line and become more popular. Marvel, which again had been around for a while, was having a lot of problems. They were having a lot of problems competing with DC Comics, and so you get to around 1960 or so, and Marvel Comics jumps on the proverbial bandwagon for superheroes again. I mean, there already were, but around the same time, say the late 40s, early 50s or so, both publishers had started to see a decline in their readership for superhero comics. Now, keep in mind here, when I say superhero, I'm actually using a trademarked word by Marvel Comics. Uh, the term in DC Comics is actually metahuman. But the more popular term, more well known, is superhero. Everyone thinks the phrase superhero. Well, that's actually owned by Marvel. So now you know that. But anyway, in the 60s, Marvel became incredibly popular due in part, well, actually almost entirely, to the actions of one man who we all know, Stan Lee. Now, he was not the only person who worked for Marvel Comics. He was not the only designer. He was not the only editor and whatnot. But he's the one that we all identify with as being the change in in Marvel Comics. The change for DC actually came. Uh, DC's first major character was Superman, okay, and they followed that about a year later with Batman. Batman is arguably the most popular superhero ever. You can say you can make a decent case for an individual like Superman, but typically more people are going to say they like Batman more than anybody else. Um, Bob Kane and Bill Finger did a lot, and there's a reason I'm mentioning Bill Finger. Bob Kane was not. He's viewed as being, the 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 reason we have Batman, but it was more so due to Bill Finger. But that's again an entirely in-depth discussion there. Anyway, about 1965 or so, Marvel Comics started putting out. No, I'm sorry, it was before that. A little earlier than that, 61, somewhere around there. Marvel Comics started putting out their superheroes that we all now know. We started getting the X-Men, Iron Man, the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man. It's around this time that the Avengers was formed. Uh, uh, some of the earlier Marvel superheroes that had come about, such as Captain America, were brought back. So he, comes back into the fold. The Incredible Hulk comes around. You start getting Black Widow. Um, all this, basically everything that you see in the Marvel Cinematic Universe right now, which includes Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Guardians of the Galaxy. Actually, Guardians of the Galaxy came around in the 80s, or late 70s, early 80s, so somewhere around there. But all of these, you know, stories and ideas that you see that people go see in theaters right now, they're some of the most popular movies of all time. Uh, they came about from between 1960 and 1970. Um, but that right there is really the two major differences. DC is older, and they have older type of storylines, and Marvel is effectively younger, but they have newer storylines. And when I say effectively younger, I mean the difference in popularity is 20 to 30 years or so between them. Now, DC and Marvel both shared uh, the spotlight during what's called the Golden Age of comic books, and they did the Silver Age, and they have the Bronze Age, and they have now. Um, but the height in their actual popularity was a little different. What seems to have happened is, older people, especially those who were around in World War II, actually read DC Comics more than Marvel. It's not that Marvel's not read, but they just read more superhero characters like Superman and Batman and everything, because they did storylines, where they wound up fighting Nazis. Marvel had success during the Vietnam War, and that's why uh, the comics are often given different allegories for real world points of view. DC comic readers tend to be, um, I really hate to say this, but DC comic readers and fans tend to be a little more on, I guess, the conservative side, and Marvel comics tend to be a little more on the liberal side. Now, that's not to say that both comics, both comic universes for Marvel and DC, are able to be split that way. They're not. It's a very subtle thing. Um, but both uh, comic companies have embraced the idea that superheroes definitely represent something for society. DC stance, as we discussed the other day on the Friday show, between Nick and I, is that their characters tend to be um, representative of established mythos, specifically, Greco-Roman mythos. Like the idea that Batman is Hades, he's the guardian of the underworld. Then you have Superman, who is Zeus, and so on. Marvel comics uh, have been linked to, excuse me, particularly the X-Men, almost expressly the X-Men. The X-Men have been used as a vehicle to represent civil rights. Um, Through the 60s and 70s or so, people looked at the X-Men and realized, hey, this is a segment of society that's being cut off from everyone else. They're told they're different. They're told, you can't get married, you can't vote, you can't own property, stuff like that. And it was related very easily to the idea of segregation that was so popular in the country at that point in time. I mean, when I say popular, I mean it was what was going on. But the X-Men became an allegory for uh, civil rights of African Americans or Black people, whichever term you want to use. I'm not trying to start an argument here. But in the 80s, a lot of characters in Marvel Comics, again, particularly the X-Men, began to be discussed as an allegory for the gay community. And now they're viewed by the admission of at least one animator who has worked with Marvel. They represent the views, and keep in mind this is actually post Civil War in the Marvel universe. Uh, Characters like the X-Men represent the individuals, like, for example, gun owners. They're um, powerful individuals, and in their hands they effectively wield the ability to destroy others or to affect change. It's now that's entirely different, from how characters like the X-Men have been viewed. But it's important that at least one person says that. The reason it's important is because you can look at characters like the X-Men and see they definitely represent a civil rights concern. And there's a lot of people who want civil rights for various things. So whether you want to view them as um, being anti-segregation or being backup for LGBT rights, or you want to say they're gun owners or they're whatever, you can put that point of view on the comics, and and they can hold that. Um, the problem, well, not where the problem, I was going to say, but with DC, you do sort of get that comparison, but it's not readily on the surface. Okay, with DC storylines, and I'm talking most of the Justice League, you have a lot of interpretation, more so of what is good versus evil. And I'm going to pick specific examples for this. You have Batman and the Joker, and I'm going with this because this is the easiest comparison to make for what seems to be DC Comics' stance on everything. Society is based on a paradigm. This paradigm of one side versus the other. That's why I mentioned earlier. In the United States, you have Marvel, DC, Republican, Democrat. You have liberal, conservative, left, right, red, blue. It's like America seems to be split down the middle. And I believe to me, this is my point of view, that is why DC Comics resonates more with so many people, because it's clearly divided in between good and evil. The problem is DC has done something amazing with Batman and the Joker. They are effectively the exact same character. Neither character can kill one another because they need one another. That's an argument that's been made for years now. It was certainly brought up in The Dark Knight with Heath Ledger's Joker and Christian Bale's Batman. I can't kill you, you can't kill me. The only difference is we're just here. It was that kind of statement. And that's a wonderful statement. The reason is, um, it puts into perspective the idea that you need good, you need bad, you need left, right, you need light, dark, whatever way you want to split things, you need everything to coexist. Okay. Marvel, on the other hand, seems to have been saying these different people are one day going to be the future, and that's what you get with the X-Men. That's actually been the statement behind individuals like Magneto, who say, you know, mutants are the future of mankind. We're you as you're going to evolve, and anyone who does not agree with that needs to get out of the way. That's actually a statement that was brought up, as I've mentioned before, in uh, Mobile Suit Gundam. The idea of new types, and I guess you could say old types. Things are going to change, and society has to change, and that's why Marvel traditionally gets lumped in as being, the more progressive of the two comics. But DC, again, is still more popular. Well, at least their characters are. If you go up and ask a random individual, do you want to be, say, Batman or Iron Man? Most people will say Batman. And the reason just seems to be Batman's intelligent. Now, I'm not saying, a character like Tony Stark or Peter Parker are intelligent. I'm just saying Batman represents the everyday man. And that's, if you remember a while back when we did the show discussing um, the possibility, what may happen with the Dawn of Justice film, that's what I'm getting at. Batman represents the everyday individual. The idea that you can be a certain person and you can stand up and you can make a change. It's a really positive message. Both comic universes are really good at giving that kind of positive message. Now, in this whole time, I've been talking about this. Please understand, I am not saying at all that I think one is better at it than the other. I just think that both of them, both DC and Marvel, actually address this relatively the same issue in different ways. But another difference, before I get into this, it becomes a political mess. Another major difference is that DC is split basically into two groups. You have the Justice League, and then you have uh, basically the Suicide Squad. And that's just going off of what seems to be going in the cinematic universe right now. It's actually a lot more in depth and and a lot more complicated. But that's effectively what you have. You have, good versus evil. Um, a lot of the characters that are in the Justice League, all, as I said, all represent various things, and they all have a counterpart in Suicide Squad. Now, granted, every DC villain has not actually been in the Suicide Squad, but that's just the name I'm going to apply to it because it's relevant to the discussions we've been having on the show lately. Um, with Marvel, uh, you have their heroes forming almost entirely groups, whether they're villains or heroes. But most people are aware more of the heroes being in their groups, such as clearly the Avengers, uh, Then you have the X-Men, Fantastic Four, Guardians of the Galaxy, and the only one out of their, the only one out of the major Marvel character lineup that seems to be on his own is Spider-Man. With DC Comics, you tend to see a lot of characters that are able to function on their own. Batman does not necessarily need Robin. He does not necessarily need Batgirl. Superman does not necessarily need Superboy or Supergirl. Wonder Woman does not need her counterpart. Martian Manhunter does not need. You don't need the necessary individuals, and the counterparts are oftentimes mimics of the older ones. But what you have in Marvel is you have group after group after group that just share this one, you know, collective force. And uh, what tends to happen is you have individuals who show up in Marvel Comics and they're able to get followers to come to their side and everything. But it's all these groups taking on one objective at once. Like we discussed the other day, um, Marvel right now, well, I mean, they have a couple other important, bad guys going on. But at least as far as the cinematic universe is concerned, uh, you have two effective bad guys. You have Thanos, who is gaining power, and then you have Apocalypse, who is gaining power. These two are most likely not going to interact in the movies. I don't know. It would be cool if they did, but I can't say for sure. But that's again a difference that Marvel and DC have because Marvel's licenses are split up, at least for movie wise, are split up, and DC's are not. You have completely different views on bad guys and good guys fighting. But that's a reason that I think a lot of people still identify more with DC comic characters. You have this clear split, but DC is really good at it. They're both DC and Marvel are really good at telling, their stories. They're really good at it, and I like both of them. But what you have, at certain times, is you have groups. Actually, another group. Thinking about this, um, Marvel actually has done a very decent, actually two decent, good versus evil groups. Um, the Autobots and Decepticons, good versus evil, and GI Joe and Cobra, again, good versus evil. Those are actually those are both printed through Marvel Comics, um, and that's the theme for Marvel. They will release a team of superheroes, and that's what you get. And it's cool, it's fantastic, it's amazing. But they don't really have a lot of standalone individuals. The only standalone characters they've had, as I mentioned earlier, are characters like Captain America. Captain America now has to work with somebody else, or he's not really functional, and that led to uh, the Civil War in the Marvel universe, the Marvel Comics universe, and now we're going to be getting that in, I believe, next year in the movies. Um, the problem with having all these groups that are allied and they're working together is there's going to be different. There's going to be a difference somewhere that that someone's going to have a problem with, and it's going to cause friction. And as you saw, if you're aware of the Civil War storyline, it split the Marvel superhero lineup in half. They wound up fighting one another in this massive war, all for this political nonsense. Now, I'm not saying that Marvel is advocating that in society or whatever, but I'm saying that's what Marvel had to deal with, and that became their storyline. So now everything is divided in before Civil War and after Civil War. DC Comics didn't have that. They've never had a massive civil war that I can think of between their heroes off the top of my head. Now they've had different versions of the Justice League show up at one point in time. They've had heroes fight one another, but it's never been this massive rift that was formed in the metahuman community. Um, but DC has also had some of the more powerful storylines that have come out. Typically, whenever you ask, someone who likes comics, is there any particular, story arc that you like? Well, with Marvel comics, it tends to all be Civil War. Like that tends to be what everyone will acknowledge. Was the storyline, whether you like it or not. Now there are other ones, but that's just what people acknowledge. Um, for at least for me, having asked people that I know. Um, but when you ask about DC, you tend to get something that's a little different. Okay, uh, it's something that's a little older, and DC tends to be uh, a lot of it revolves around obviously Batman versus Superman. So there's that. So there's that one storyline idea right there, and that has gone on for years now, mind you. But the other one is the death of Robin, the death of Jason Todd at the hand of the Joker. People remember that. There is also the storyline that's brought up where uh, pretty recently the Joker cut his own face off just to prove that he's similar to Batman. Like underneath, he is exactly the same as Batman. Uh, his face is a mask. There's also uh, the shooting of uh, Barbara Gordon. There's storylines that pop up, and they all tend to be Batman. But they're oh, and there's also the death of Superman. There's a lot of different stories that pop up when people think of comic books, particularly DC Comics. Um, DC was also the publisher of the Watchmen comics, and if you've listened to anything on the show, I love the Watchmen. I really do, but it's a very popular storyline. Uh, it's something that people can recognize themselves in, for better or worse. But that's honestly that's really the major differences without getting too in depth. And I know I've kind of rambled on certain points here and there, or just stuck to them, and I'm sure I've probably done more harm in explaining them than I have them good. But if you get the time and you want to make the effort, look into both comic universes, and you'll see, there's a wide variety of things that are good and a wide variety of things that are bad. About and when I say good or bad, I don't mean that. Again, I don't mean I like one more than the other one, and you need to too as well. But I mean, there's different aspects that someone may like and someone else doesn't like. But this has just been my personal standpoint on it. But I hope it's helped you know at least one specific person from in understanding what differences are. Anyway, um, I'm probably going to redo the LFR LFG rant video from the other day, so don't look for that to be up for forever, if at all. Um, the Friday show's coming up, as I said last night in the video that I posted. Danny will be back next week, and Nick will be here this week. I'll be here this week, and still not going to announce what the topic's going to be for this week. You'll just have to keep an eye out on the Facebook page. Please, 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 if you have not already liked it, please go do so. I'm, excuse me, I tend to put more information on there now, or as I'm trying to. So please like the Facebook page. Message me on Twitter. Message me over there. Message me in the comments down below. More importantly, please remember to like, comment, share, subscribe to this video, and look for more updates in the future. Yeah, that's really it, I suppose. Have a great day, and talk to you soon. Bye-bye.